Right. Well, hello and welcome to our first Forgotten Foundations of Fundraising webinar this year on fine-tuning direct response. I'm very excited about our conversation today, which is hosted by AmPhil's Center for Civil Society and Philanthropy Daily. I'll make one quick note. If you've joined us in the past, you'll notice that we're now referring to AmPhil rather than American Philanthropic. You likely saw on social media or email a few days ago that we just announced our new name. Along with our same commitment to strengthening civil society. So we've shortened our name. Mercifully, we've shortened our URL. But as you'll see today and in future events that you join, the name marks no change in our commitment to our core mission. That, of course, is why we're here today. Direct response might not seem like the most enthralling parts of civil society and voluntary associations, but just wait, you'll see. Our goal today is to pull back the curtain a bit and give you an inside look into how to put together a successful direct response campaign. I wanted to approach this webinar today, as you'll hear me say again and again, as practitioners rather than as experts, so to speak. I want to show you the questions to ask and the things to consider when you're planning a direct response program or even just an email or a mail campaign or an effort. Less today of here's how this should be or here's how that should be, but here's the way we think about this while we're putting together a campaign. Here's the thought process of making sure this works. So to do that, I have Mark and Stephanie with us today. They'll give us a broad overview of what direct mail and online email fundraising look like, how they work, and then we're going to jump into questions. What you'll find is that Mark and Stephanie are not only wise and experienced with direct response fundraising, they're also extremely enthusiastic about what it can do and how it can work. I've learned a lot working closely with them over the past couple of years, and I thought it would be really valuable to pull some of their knowledge out and share it with all of you. I thought I've learned all of these things from Mark and all of these things from Stephanie, and I shouldn't be jealous and keep it to myself. I should make sure everybody who's wise enough to tune in today can learn all the same things from them. Now, I've got my questions to sort of make this process happen, but all of you should please submit your questions too. Drop them anytime in the chat or the Q&A box. We'll cover as much as we can today. Before we go any further, let me introduce Mark and Stephanie. Mark Diggs is a managing consultant with AmPhil. He truly is a strategic marketing professional leading strategy and execution today with several major direct mail accounts here. With more than 2 decades of broad experience in the field of philanthropy, nonprofit management, fundraising, and consulting, Mark is well positioned to understand the needs of nonprofit organizations. He always brings a really unique perspective to what we're working on, and it always helps drive growth, innovation, and revenue source diversification. I think we'll get into the last of those really big terms there, which has been super helpful to me working with him. Mark in his career has served both on the agency and consultant side where he is now, and he's worked internally at a couple of nonprofits, lots of them great organizations making huge impact in our society. In addition to the strategy and marketing mind, Mark brings, you'll see in no time, a high level of commitment and really enthusiastic missional focus to his work. He always sees the big picture and helps us reach the marketing goals. Mark also has a degree from the Wheaton Conservatory of Music in Wheaton, Illinois, and currently lives in Greenville, South Carolina. Stephanie D'Anselmi is a senior consultant with AmPhil. She joins us today all the way from Rome, Italy, where she's working well after hours to join us for this webinar. Before joining AmPhil, Stephanie worked in marketing at WHYY, that's Philadelphia's public media station, where she learned the ins and outs of the membership model that she'll share with us today. She stewarded their written brand and elevated the digital fundraising program to $1 million revenue generator. Prior to that, Stephanie worked with Peter Greer at Hope International as a writer, helping with his books 40/40 Vision and Mission Drift. Today, Stephanie works in general consulting, advising many clients on all aspects of fundraising, but she brings a particular expertise in building successful email programs, which she'll bring to bear in our conversation today. Stephanie studied politics, philosophy, and economics, as well as music at the Templeton Honors College outside of Philadelphia. So today we have 2 musicians to bring us through the wild world of direct response fundraising and how that can strengthen civil society. So what I want to do next, Mark, I'll have you give us a quick overview of direct mail. And then why don't you kick it over to Stephanie for email, and then we'll jump right into questions. Mark,
Sure.
take it away, please.
Yeah, I'd be glad to do that. I forgot that Stephanie was a musician. It's just so typical. Fundraisers and musicians. It's all that left and right brain thinking, right? Well, first of all, I just want to review some basics about what direct response fundraising is. First and foremost, it's direct, it's accountable, it's measurable. That's one of the things I love about what I do for a living is I can measure my progress and the progress of my clients. So one of the things we do in direct response is we make sure to give a distinct and singular call to action. And what we're doing is providing a vehicle for the donor to respond to that call to action. So that could take the form of a physical reply device with an envelope. It could be a link to a landing page for a digital appeal, for example, or a TV ad. It could be a toll-free telephone number through different channels. So, the key element is you have that call to action and then the means to respond to it directly. But direct response fundraising, it's very different than some other kinds of fundraising, particularly like major donor advancement, major donor gifts, major donor cultivation. How it really differs from major donors is I like to use the metaphor of, well, I'll incorporate another metaphor, but if major gift fundraising is like the old man in the sea, fishing that deep blue water for that elusive great marlin, then direct response fundraising is more like a river runs through it. And I like that river metaphor because it's like fishing from the riverbank. And that's analogous to direct response because it's the source of direct response giving is not unlike a river. What are the elements of a river, the characteristics? River, it's always moving. It's shallower, but the water flows by and it never returns. Once it flows by, it's gone forever. That's like direct response because grassroots fundraising, we're making asks for smaller gifts and from larger numbers of people. Such donors to direct response, they don't give out of their assets like major donors often do. They're giving out of their monthly budget. So that means more specifically out of their discretionary spending budget, the money that's left over after all the bills are paid and you've set aside money for your savings. It's what's left over. And that's essentially an impulse sort of decision, an impulse buy. And that discretionary money, it's going to be spent. It's gonna, like the river, it flows by, it's never gonna come back one way or another and never to return. So that has huge implications for our fundraising strategy. The seasonality and the cadence of a direct response annual plan calendar, it requires that we plan out our campaigns and our evergreen offers very thoughtfully with an eye toward making incremental gains. So the riverbank analogy, it helps, I think, to give us insight into how we should fine tune our direct response program and to yield major dividends and to increase our effectiveness in fundraising. And then another concept that I like to talk about that dovetails perfectly with what I just said is pillar offers. That's a term I like to use to describe how you build that annual plan and how you build that calendar. These are like anchors and pillars for that schedule. And it can really help you build an effective annual plan. I have a number of clients where we've built direct response programs from scratch, where they weren't even doing it direct mail, or maybe they had paused or reduced what they were doing and we were coming in to reboot it. So it's just a great chance to figure out, we're taking things that we know work, but then applying it and customizing it for that particular situation, that particular audience and client. So pillar offer, it's a seasonal offer that you can return to every year. So the idea is like, for example, if you have an offer, we developed an offer for a client where it was a new school that they were launching, and we knew that there would be a chance to do the same kind of offer next year and with an update for everything that had happened in the past year and to raise money for that. That's a good example of that. An end of the year campaign is a typical example. We always have like a looking back at what you've accomplished during the year, what the donor has accomplished, and then looking forward to what the vision is for next year and how the donor can be a part of that story and be a pivotal part of it. So along with the pillar offers, you're also wanting to do a very clear presentation of the problem or the opportunity, how the donor's gift is going to help, and then a clear call to action that answers the question, why give now? So the urgency, I think, is really important. Think of it as being timely, and fishing in the morning, fishing in the evening, sometimes fishing at midday, and being there with the right bait at the right time, and something that's going to attract attention, because you do have to answer that question, why should I give now? And that without that urgency, you're not going to tap into that impulse buy, and you're not going to tap into that discretionary spending. That's where it really, the rubber meets the road. And then, in acquisition, as opposed to like renewal, I was talking about pillar offers for house file renewal campaigns, but in acquisition, we hedge our risk by testing into control packages. So we develop, the King of the Hill package. Pillar packages are kind of like that. It's almost like a quasi control package. So the idea of the control package and acquisition is something you can repeat month in and month out until you can test out of it with something that's better. So you could look at pillar packages as similar to that. Yeah, and so what we're doing by using pillar packages, testing into those, by using control packages and acquisition, testing into those, we're essentially hedging our risk and trying to give every opportunity to succeed with the appeals.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. So the two key things here, right? What we're doing in direct mail is fishing in a river. What that means is the opportunity is always moving by, and we need to be casting lines into that river frequently and consistently before we miss the opportunity. Is that right?
That's right. So it means literally we need to be in the email box. We need to be in the mailbox. Think of it as opportunity cost. If you're not there, particularly like the last 2 months of the year, that's prime giving season. 30% of giving is going to happen in the last 2 months of the year, maybe 10% in the last week. So that has huge implications for digital fundraising and for direct mail. So those end of year campaigns are really important. Yeah, if you didn't, I mean, there's lots of reasons why you might not be in the mail. I mean, we've had, if you have like a hurricane or some logistical concern that's causing you to delay, I mean, that's kind of an impact on your income. So we all know this, but the idea of fine tuning is getting the timing right and the right offer at the right time to the right people.
So it's sort of like you could look at the end of the year and say, okay, we made $200,000 on direct mail this year. We mailed 8 times. What if we just mail fewer packages and then our net will be higher because our costs are lower? The problem is, what you're trying to say is, if you think from the end user perspective, from the donor's perspective, you don't know when you're going to catch them as somebody giving money, right? You don't know when they're ready to bite. And so if we only send 2 packages, we might perform really well in those 2 packages, but we might miss the month when donor A is ready to give. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, some of this is about, having balance in your program. So, I mean, there are some packages where I'm going to want to mail deep and try to renew as much of the house file segmentation as possible. So I'm trying to push for metrics. So I'm willing to do less efficiently on my return on investment for that particular package, especially if it's like got a survey or an engagement device and it's going to tend to generate more engagement. That's a perfect time to go deep on your select. So that's an example where you would want to be in the mail and it wouldn't be as efficient. But I mean, if you were just going for efficiency and that was your only metric, you could essentially, I mean, that would be one of the things I would look for. If I was looking at coming on board and looking at an annual, annual plan, looking at the history, particularly in direct mail, that would be one of the things that would be a red flag for me. If you were like just going for efficiency, and they call that creaming the file. So you can do that in terms of your segmentation. You can also do that in terms of your frequency of mailing. So it makes the accounting people more happy because you're not spending as much, but you have to spend money to make money. And long term, you have to look at multiple metrics. Mm-hmm. So there's the return on investment for the project itself and for the campaign. There's also the long-term metrics of attrition and renewal and how those, direct mail is an engine. And it's one of the engines that keeps your donor file healthy. Think of it as an organism, or a garden that has to be watered and pruned and taken care of. These are people. They're not a wallet. And so you need to be engaging with them regularly. And also, I mean, I mentioned engagement devices. Sometimes you're going to be doing more, like cultivation and not just solicitation. So there's a cadence to it. There's a back and forth. You need to mix it up. You need to be entertaining and fresh, but you also need to understand what works and stick with that as much as possible.
Yeah, good. Okay, I'm going to come back to what metrics to look at, both on a single campaign or broadly. Before we keep rolling on direct mail, Stephanie, give us a high-level overview of digital, of email.
Sure. I mean, this won't be any surprise, but all of the same principles apply. So, take everything that Mark just said and think about the way the audience is receiving it. And a lot of the same things are necessary. They're just necessary much quicker and more frequently. So like the main important things in thinking about email as it compares to mail is when you want to be hitching to the same ride and when you want to be on your own. So when Mark has an incredible mail campaign set up, I'm not going to go just do my thing over here with email. I'm going to look at what he's doing and structure our asks based on what he's asking and target people that he's targeted and speak to them personally. You might have seen my letter that just got into your mailbox, or hopefully you've seen it, or the USPS might never send it to you because that's kind of how it works. But that kind of person, the extreme relationship that you can get to someone with an email address is the main thing that makes it a little different than direct mail. And because if you think about it, like when someone gives you their email address, that's what they're using to log into their bank. That's what they're using to read notes from their mom. They're taking you around in their pocket everywhere. They're probably reading your email sometimes in the bathroom. Like it's a very personal thing to be given someone's email address. And I think we lose sight of how valuable that little address is because they come in, you put up your pop-up, you have it on your website, and these names come in seemingly for free. And so they can't be worth that much. But you just remember how personal it is and how it feels if you get hacked or you have to change it, or if you have a really normal sounding last name and you have to marry an Italian so you can get a better email address, like email is important to people. So I think that's kind of the first thing that is most important to think about when you're trying to set up your calendar for the year is what are the people on the other side going to experience? This is a really personal medium. And that can mean both directions. It's personal for the person sending it and receiving it. So one of the things we always think through in a campaign is who are the people with a voice at your organization that people want to hear from, and what can we do to get that voice in front of the person? What can we do to make the pitch that you make in a major donor meeting happen to 600,000 people on your email list and have them feel like they've actually been valued and asked and stewarded, and they are one of your most loyal donors, just like you say in every email, right? So that's kind of the first big pillar for email is the personhood really. And then the next thing we probably would think about is the frequency. How often are you emailing is a question that we get asked a lot. And when you're thinking about putting something in context with a big direct mail package, Mark gets one letter and it has to be the best letter. And it is the best letter because Mark was involved, right? But I get like 6 to 12 chances to make different parts of that letter work over email. So that can be like a really fun way to get to know your audience. And then you can even use that information the next time that you're going back. Like, if Mark is doing this big campaign for us on inflation, and then I do these emails on inflation, and you see that the audience is responding to this particular, like when you're talking about it in their groceries, and they're not responding to when you talk about, I don't know, the way the government is handling it, or vice versa, you can use that information people are giving you by what they're opening, clicking on, and donating from. To continue fine tuning throughout the whole year, and not just in the email program, but back in the mail program as well, if you are a united force like you hopefully are. And then probably, Mark talked about having the pillar offer, and we would say the same thing for email. The most important thing when you're picking an offer is just to have one, like period. So many people don't even have any sort of a value or an offer in their emails. So we spend a lot of time when we're strategizing with clients thinking, what do you really have to offer that I can give someone from this email? I want to give a value to this person because there is a lot of competition in the inbox. So you don't want to just send out, please help me, we're so great, our mission is so great. Like there has to be something that you're giving them back. And especially when you have even shorter attention spans that we're working with. I mean, Mark is fishing, and I love that analogy, but I wonder for email if we're more kind of like grabbing for minnows, like these people are going to spend statistically 1 to 3 seconds with your email before they decide to delete it or read it. So, we're just this tiny, we're the ephemeral little touches that we're sending out, which is why we do so many of them. But it really adds up to a lot. So I think one of the most important things that places like NPR and the New Yorker are doing right is this kind of membership movement. They're not thinking about email addresses as random things that come in sometimes for a website, or like, oh, we have an email because someone donated once online, so it's great that they gave that to us. Like, this is a piece of gold for a membership program, because you really have to scale, first of all, for revenue. I mean, you can get to a place where you're making significant amount of money off of digital fundraising. It's not, it's cheaper in a way to produce it, but it doesn't mean that it's not valuable or doesn't have a lot of upside for revenue. But even more than revenue, like, I don't care if these people are giving $5 a month, that's not going to necessarily say that much about your bottom line. But first of all, if you get a lot of them, it can say a little bit more. But even more important than that, like, they're raising their hand to be a part of your movement. The thing that's your mission, they're giving $5 of their, their money to it. They're raising their hand saying, I identify as someone who cares about this. Like, you think about everyone who's walking around with those tote bags everywhere. Like, we want to have that same feeling, no matter what your mission is. There's something that you can do to make people feel like they're part of a community of like-minded people. And even if you never made $1 off of all these people on email, you're benefiting them greatly if you really believe about your mission. To get 10,000 people believing in that mission in a way that they're willing to put a little bit in is pretty incredible. So that's sort of an overview of email and how it relates to mail.
That's great. I love the point about how personal this is. I mean, mail and email, both of them, we always talk about how personal major gift meetings are, right? You're sitting down at having lunch with somebody, or maybe visit their house. You might get to know their kids. And this isn't maybe quite as personal, but you are getting into their house. You're getting into the homes of thousands of people, either in their mailbox, and maybe they're sitting down on the couch to read your letter, or as you say, Steph, they're scrolling your emails while they're driving home, or maybe in the bathroom, any number of places where they might be getting to know your mission and your organization better. One of the things you said, Steph, is you've got 6 to 12 chances to do better. Okay, so here's the question. We've put together a direct mail campaign. I'm going to back up in a second and go to the beginning of kicking off a campaign. I'm going to ask Mark about that. But say we already did that. The 3 of us are running this campaign. And Steph, you've got 10 emails drafted for this direct mail effort, whatever it is. And then you're watching what happens and you're responding to performance. What kinds of things are you going to do to make this email, the 3rd email and the 4th email and the 5th email perform better so that it's strong by the end?
Sure. I mean, part of it is going to be reliant on how, I say I have all these chances, but you do have to lay the groundwork in the beginning, because, you see a lot of those really, really short emails by the end of a campaign, and that's great. And that works really well, but it's not because someone tested throughout and then realized shorter emails work. It's that they were setting up the groundwork the whole time. So hopefully by the time you get to that really short email, it's because everyone knows what's going on. So it's some things you can't really test because they're going to be affected by each other. But the kind of thing that you're looking for to keep something fresh throughout 10 whole emails would be, you can change the offer, and you can change the voice, and you can change the way that it's displayed. So we do lean really hard into, plain text emails, really personal seeming emails. But if you have a long campaign, it's great to have 1 or 2 that are pretty richly designed. And, with a grain of salt, richly designed, like it has a button and a picture, maybe, you can get fancier than that. That's on you. But yeah, you're looking for, sometimes you go in with someone who you really resonate with from the company, and you're like, this author that wrote this book who's totally awesome and everyone loves on Twitter, and I'm going to use this person as the voice for the email. And then people just don't really respond, and you use someone else who you thought like, oh, this is probably a little bit too highbrow, like, I don't know, this is pretty deep stuff that he's writing in his book over here, so we'll try it out, but don't know what to expect. And you find that they respond to the second one. Well, all of a sudden now the rest of the emails, I mean, you don't want every single one to be from the same guy, but if people are really responding at that time to a certain person, I would change and pivot, who's sending the rest of those emails.
Good. Let's back up a little bit. So these are great overviews. Now let's sort of get into the action here. Mark, Steph, we're kicking off a campaign. We're coming up on whatever it is. We're a couple months out from direct mail. And we hop on a Zoom call together. Mark, what's the first question that you're going to ask me when we're sort of filling out, putting together the strategy for this mailing?
Yeah. Okay. So the first thing I want to say is that I've already asked questions before we ever even got to the kickoff meeting in the annual plan and the strategy phase. At the 30,000 foot level, low resolution, I already have sort of an idea of what we're doing. So the idea is like, we're not shooting from the hip. Although sometimes you have to do that because emergency appeal things come up. So that's fun to do as well. But generally speaking, we're working within the context not only of an annual plan for like direct mail or digital, but an integrated marketing communications plan that has everything in it. We could talk more about that later and why that's important and how that works. But okay, so we already have a top line view of what we're doing. Now we're getting together to launch the actual project. So this means we're getting down to the nitty gritty. The core thing we have to establish is fleshing out the offer and making sure it's a decent offer, one that's going to be clear to the donor and that's going to be compelling. So there are certain elements that are let's call them questions that have to be answered. I alluded to it a little bit earlier in my introduction, but essentially you're solving a problem or you're taking advantage of an opportunity. So you need to describe what that is. This is related to the mission of the organization, but of course the way that we're going to communicate it is going to be from the donor's point of view. They're the hero of the story. It's going to be donor-centric copy, but we are solving a problem together or taking advantage of an opportunity. So we got to answer that question. It needs to be clear. And then also we're going to be asking, well, how are you solving the problem? So getting into some of the mechanics of the mission. You're going to be asking, well, how is my gift going to be used and how much is it going to cost? How much is it going to cost is like the hardest question of all. It's like pulling teeth sometimes to get that information. To give you an example of like how I'm trying to preload some of that information, next week I'm going to be visiting a client, and we already had our strategic meeting back in September for the current calendar year, but we're coming back to revisit, and one of our goals is to have an offer summit. So an offer summit is where we get together and we actually have someone who understands the budget and brings the budget into the room and goes through some line items with us. And then we get to ask questions. And then we get to say, hey, what is this line item? I didn't know about that. What are you doing with students there? And literally you can discover offers that way. Sometimes the offer is staring you at the face and it's so simple and you're just like, why didn't we think of that? But getting people in the room like that is just a really good exercise, and dedicating. This is hard work. It takes time. We have to think it through. We can't do it alone. We have to do it together. This is hard collaborative work. So an offer summit is a part of that. That's where you preload some of that information and you have a good idea of what you're doing, and it just makes it so much easier.
So an offer, Mark, you don't just mean, so when you're doing a summit, you're going through the budget, right? An offer doesn't just mean premium, right? Like what kind of books or t-shirts?
Well, no, I mean offer in the generic sense, just generally that, okay, what are we offering the donor? There could be no premium involved at all. The premium could be all the constituent parts that are part of it constitute the offer. So it could be a back end premium or front end. We're offering you this, or we're just offering you an opportunity to make a difference in this child's life. That's the offer.
So an offer could be like a scholarship fund at a university, or it could be, however many meals you're going to provide to families in need after a crisis. That's the offer.
Yeah. In the context of like $2 to provide a meal this Thanksgiving. It could be anything. And of the sun. That's the beautiful thing about it. It's like it's got to be missional. It's got to be tied to the mission of the organization. But you don't have to fundraise on every single thing you do. You find the good stuff that's going to be compelling, and you fundraise off of that. And as far as like the designation issue, there's things you can do in terms of your language and how you present it can make all the difference in the world. So you provide caveat language, you broaden it. There's ways to do that that a good copywriter is going to know how to do. So and you include other things too, so you can broaden it. But that's the bait, that's the shiny thing that's going to be compelling and interesting. Like a good example, like we're doing a subscription. Provide subscriptions to students, mailing for one of our clients. You're working on that with me, Austin, so you're familiar with that. And that's a great example where we just answered the how much is it going to cost thing, because it's $60 for an annual digital subscription to provide for a student. to underwrite that for them. And that's how much it will cost. That's the offer.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, and then we can
And,
scale it
and
up.
then the next question is problem, right? So the problem flows from that.
Well, you start with the
We
problem
need
or
students to see
opportunity, and
this
you
kind of
work from
thing.
there. Yeah, you
Okay.
always begin with the problem because that's the reason why we're here. That's the reason why
What's the difference?
mission
Walk me through the
exists.
difference between solving a problem and taking advantage of an opportunity.
Two sides of the same coin. It's just flipping it. I like to do both. A good example of an opportunity would be a matching challenge offer. So you've got major donors that have done a lead gift, and they're gonna say, to try to encourage giving from the rest of the donors. That's an opportunity. Usually, the last question, I didn't bring this up, but in the context of a matching challenge, is a great example. A deadline, urgency. Why we need this now? If we don't get, Thanksgiving's coming. The meals won't be there if we don't get your help. Please provide a meal for Thanksgiving. It could be anything related to that, but a matching challenge, end of year campaign, December 31st deadline is just so natural. And that's a good example of an opportunity versus a problem. Of course, there could be both. There could be a problem related to it that you're solving, but here's this opportunity. Yeah. We need to buy this property now to be able to house these people or do this mission.
Yeah, that's good. That's what you're always asking when we kick these off. What's the deadline? What's the urgency? Why are they going to give? Because this comes back to the riverbank, right? You cast the line into the river, and the fish knows if he swims by that. What do you fish with bait? That little piece of hot dog might not still be there. That fly might
Well,
not.
Mark Laux said this in the chat. Is so good. There are a bunch of other people fishing on the riverbank. We're not the only one. So it's a saturated environment. We all know this. I don't know how many million. 1.5 million nonprofits are out there. I don't know what the number is these days, but it's crazy. So it's a saturated environment. And I got a really good sense of that way back in the day, early in my career when I was meeting with, it was an international disabilities ministry that I worked for. And we had people from the Australian office, and it was an unsaturated kind of culture. Even Germany was that way. The main offices were in Germany, and the guys in Australia were sharing the results from their acquisition campaign, and they were getting 3% response. And the real kicker was the list came out of the white pages. It wasn't even like a targeted list. So that's an unsaturated environment. That means you don't have a lot of other people fishing on the bank. That was 1950s America, right?
Okay, I'm going to come back to that in 1 second, but first, because these questions will work in order. So we've done this, we've answered problem, offer, urgency, working our letter. And then Steph, I'm going to hand you this letter that we've got drafted. I'm going to say, hey, we need emails to coordinate with this. What are you going to do? How are you going to schedule them? And how are you going to turn that letter into a coordinated email campaign?
Sure. So I think the first thing that we would probably talk about are your lists. Who are the people that we're going to be reaching out to? We want to look at your whole email list, not just the list of people that Mark has just mailed with physical mail. We want to look at your prospects, at deeper lefts, people who didn't end up in that mailing, etc. And so you first of all want to try to figure out what your segments are. And if you're not usually segmenting your audience when you do solicitations, a really simple way to do it is just to do prospect, active, lapsed, and major donors. So if you have those 4 groups split up, hopefully you'll have a little bit more that you can get down to, especially with the prospects, if you know where they came from and can try to speak to their interests on a more personal level. But at the base level, you have those 4 groups of people. And so you're taking the copy and thinking, first of all, you want it to be, it's how often or how long are your letters usually, Mark? Like 4 to 8 pages or something?
It could be anything from 1 page to 8 or 10 pages. It depends.
Yeah. So when you get into the longer ones and you're starting to break them up, try to figure out what the themes are, because there's usually going to be a couple of different themes, especially in those longer levels letters, and split those up into multiple different campaigns. So you have the first one where you probably are stealing a lot of intro copy and getting the person to figure out, like, why do they care about this person who's writing to me? Like, what's so special about Austin? That kind of thing. And then you want to basically steal all of the parts that are bolded and underlined, and just take a little bit of paragraphs here and there to put in between those bold and underlined, but like you're cutting that whole thing down to just it's not just the core. Is the main thing that you're looking at is just to get it to be short. And then you also want to have a conversation about what you're doing outside of that letter, because you don't want everything to just be from that one letter or from that one voice. You can still use content from that letter. First, I mean, people are not going to read the letter, memorize the letter, and then be like, wait a minute, Mark from Amphil is emailing me and he said the sentence that Austin from Amphil mailed me. Like, they're not going to do that. So first of all, don't worry about it. If you're really worried about it, you can do it as a quote, which can be really powerful. So like, Mark is writing this is from his voice, right? And he's like, it's just like Austin said. That's probably your subject line, that kind of thing. So you can repurpose that copy throughout. But you also want to be thinking about what you're doing that has nothing to do with the letter. So that's probably, the more ephemeral offers, things that come up, because like Mark mentioned that they had a planning summit in September, right? That's
Yeah,
not usually the way that email goes. So we might be planning the times that we want to do campaigns, but we don't have the same strictures for timelines that the mail groups have. So if something happens, like in that scholarship piece that you're doing right now, if you're putting the copy down now and it's actually going to be mailed out, like 2 months from now or something like that, that it actually gets to them from when you start.
As soon as possible.
Yeah, as soon as possible, for sure. But say, there's a period of weeks to sometimes even months between when you say, this is what we're going to do, and when it gets to the mailbox. So figure out what your audience has been looking at in that time and how you can make the offer even more timely based on that. So if there's something going on in higher education that happened that Mark didn't have the opportunity to use because it had to be printed, it had to go out. So you can kind of tweak on a much quicker way with email.
I like that. That's good. So you're going to take the copy, you're going to shorten it, you're going to diversify it. You might get different signers. And then because you can change closer to the wire here, you can improve the offer by really connecting it to what's going on in the news cycle in the real world right now.
Yeah, exactly. And then you probably also think about the channel, right? So if you're doing an offer that's a book, get the first chapter as an ebook PDF that you can say, donate this much to get the book and we'll send you the first chapter right away. So you're kind of speaking to the fact that they're on their phone, they're on their computer, they're reading something online and might like to continue reading online.
Yeah, I always love this idea, right? So there, that gives you the urgency right there. Now that's a super compelling offer to say for $50, they'll send you a signed copy of the book or whatever it is. But you might wait, there'll be another email or I'll fill out my checkbook later. But if you say, I'll send you the first chapter immediately, that gives me a reason to do it right now. I'm already on my phone. I would love to get the first chapter in my inbox in just a minute. It just provides even more value. I love that idea. Okay, backing up to the saturation, I'm going to push this river analogy until it breaks. Let's see what we can do here. So we've got a saturated riverbank. I love this comment from Mark in the chat here. You have a saturated riverbank with a bunch of people fishing. I know that good fishers know how to make themselves stand out, right? If you've got all these lines in the water, you're thinking as a fisherman, I want to make sure that my fly does better than his fly or my line does better than his line. Mark, what are some of the things you're going to be thinking about to make sure that your package stands out in a saturated environment?
One of the most tricky things that I do is I try to get in there first. So I try to move up the riverbank upstream and get my line in ahead of the other guy's line. That's a pretty obvious tactic. A good example where we did that, I'm actually like, okay, so like one of our clients, we built out their entire direct response and direct mail program over a 2-year period. They were largely a major donor focused fundraising group. They were raising $20 million a year, but it was from big donors primarily. So we convinced them that, well, we had to convince them that direct response and grassroots fundraising, direct mail, mass marketing would work for them. They had a great brand, so it was a huge opportunity. And within 2 years, we've built up a donor file of just several thousand to 140,000, and their income is almost tripled. In just a 2-year period, more than doubled. And so one of the things that we did was you talk about pillar packages, even with all the cost with paper and postage, we took a risk and we did a calendar package, which is a bit counterintuitive in the current environment. We did that not 2 years ago, so in 2021. And we did a tight select, so we hedged our bets a little bit. The idea was we have all these new donors. We need to cultivate them. We need to get them to stick. We need to sell them on the mission. So we're doing newsletters. We're doing annual report. We're doing calendar. That's a good example. So we're investing heavily in that. And this year we mailed a calendar a whole month earlier. An example of, you could do instead of a 12-month calendar, you could do like a 16-month calendar and get out there before the other guy. So I basically just want my calendar up on the wall instead of the other guys. So that's a good example of how to do that, how to stand out. The urgency helps you to stand out. Answering those 5 questions I gave you in a clear way is going to make you stand out. Having donor focused copy in terms of how you communicate that is going to make you stand out. So it's the donor that's doing the work. You're just the go-between, as the charity between them, the donor and the recipient, and who's benefiting from the mission. That's a good example of how you're going to stand out. There's also other ways to do it. Keeping it fresh, being entertaining helps as well. And in direct mail, the beautiful thing is it's physical. And so there's all kinds of cool things we can do to make it stand out. If you have a client, for example, that's very visual, why not do like we do a control package for one of our clients as a poster package. It's a visual kind of opens up into a poster. They use posters in as a part of their mission, and a lot of the pictures that they show college students holding posters. Even the exact poster that we used in the control package. That's a great example where we just took something that was this is a package that other people do. And we just found a way to use it with that particular client in the best way possible, in a way that would stand out. So our shiny bait is shinier than maybe the other guys.
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing, right? Is even before we get to the copy and the problem, because you got to get people to even get there. They got to open the envelope. You're thinking about different ways to make it stand out in the mailbox, right? I grab my mail and I notice this one's heavy. That might be a calendar. This one is, I don't know, the poster package folded in a strange way or really visually attractive right away when I see it.
Yeah, and it's a lot of elements coming together. It's not just one. So I'm thinking, who's getting this? What's the audience? Is it a prospect audience? Is it the house file? Are the active donors? Are we going to lapsed donors? Are we asking for a sustainer gift? That's a huge area where we want to push harder, is in sustainer giving and regular giving, especially with younger donors, where that's a preference. Cultural preference that we're aware of. So that's an example where you want to make sure you send it to the right people. In fact, if I were to isolate one single factor in terms of all the strategy elements that come together, we create a strategic brief when we're launching a campaign. You asked about the process of launching a campaign. It starts with a strategy brief, goes to copy, then goes to design, and then into production. Whether it's direct mail, the process would be similar for digital. And the most important element is the list. That's probably 40% of what's going to make this a successful campaign is you have a good list. Like a good example, there was that one account that you and I worked on together where we had a donor list, and it was maybe 20,000 names, but it turns out we ended up testing into some of their internal prospects and found out that these donors were no better than we did some modeling, remember that, and no better than our higher ranked modeled names. So we essentially had a prospect universe to begin with, and we just needed to filter through it. But that's an example of how the list makes a difference, and the upper ranks of the model really responded better than the lower ranks.
Okay, that's actually, I'm going to come back to lists in a second, but Steph, I look in my email inbox like 1,000 times a day, and everything looks exactly the same. So same sort of problem here. You've got a saturated email inbox. How do you stand out?
Yeah, there are a lot of ways that you can try to stand out. I think sometimes people do invest in design to try to do that. You can be the one nonprofit that knows how to use GIFs and put them in your email, and that's great if that's you. For the rest of us, it's really just being intensely personal, and it tends to work best if you're thinking about your whole email program as something that's cultivating all year long. But it can also be really effective because if you keep it unexpected that you're getting emailed by the CEO a little bit, like don't make every single newsletter from the CEO, you know what I mean? It can help a little bit. And there are tips and tricks, like anything, just look at the last 10 emails that you got from people at your own work, like things that other people have sent you from Amphil, Austin, and the subject lines that they're using and that little preview text that they're using, and try to mimic that. So you're not saying sometimes you're saying deadline, donate by midnight, and that's great. But sometimes you're saying like, hey, did you get a chance to look at this?
Mm,
And it can be a little bit like fishy sometimes. So you have to be careful, especially making sure that what's inside matches what's outside. So
mhm.
if you're saying something like, hey, did you get my note? Did you get a chance to look this over? Or can I have this across my desk? I don't know, whatever like weird thing you're doing to make it seem like they're really getting an email from work or from somebody. Just make sure that inside you're sharing with them something because it's a trust equation. So you can be a little bit more playful with subject lines
Yeah.
that you might think are a little bit spammy as long as you're giving something to them once they get in about yourself. So
Mhm.
being like transparency is like the number one thing to
So,
make you
so
stand
when,
out.
sorry to interrupt, but when you said look at what other people from Anvil are emailing me, you don't mean our marketing emails. You mean
Oh
like
no.
when Mark sends me an email, what does his subject line look like? What does the beginning of his email look like? And mimic that.
Well, let's not
Yeah,
even
like
go
10
there.
minutes at 2 p.m. or
Mhm. I like
that.
that.
Just
But then also
just
make
be a
sure
person.
it's honest, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that. What about so I don't know how to do this technically on the back end, but you can change the name that shows up in terms of who it comes from. You can make it say Stephanie or Austin or Mark or whomever. But you could
Yeah.
also make it say the president or something like that. Or the organization name. Which is best, or like how do I decide which one of those to use?
Yeah, I think it's good not to use the same thing all the time. So you're lucky the answer is use them all and you're doing it right if you're just kind of going back and forth, in my opinion. It does help to have a couple people that you're sending from more often so that people start to recognize the name. Like at this point, there's a Julie at one of these nonprofits that I subscribe to. And like when Julie emails me, I know exactly what's going to be in there. And people do start to respond to that and feel like Julie really does want them to know. So do use like the same people pretty consistently, but you can do Julie, comma, Amphil. You can switch it up, and throughout a campaign, you probably want to switch it up too. So it's not always Julie, comma, Amphil for all 10. It might be Julie, it might be Amphil, it might be Julie, comma, Amphil, and then it might be, um, I don't know, like Amphil membership or something that makes it like, oh, this is an invoice, like the departments, things that make people feel like that you're checking up on them because you know about their donation history because they matter to you.
Mhm. Okay, so related to saturation again, I'm going to come back to list soon, but I love this question that came in. People are tired of emails. There's a lot of email saturation, and people are more likely to respond to texts versus email. So how do we prevent email fatigue? How many emails should I send? When should I stop? And is texting the new frontier? Should we be moving over there?
Well, first of all, the word versus is I'm canceling that right now. Texting is working really well alongside email. And if you have the capacity to be doing texting, that is awesome, and you should definitely be doing it, especially with really, really timely offers. I do feel that email has more, like, if you're finding in your nonprofit that text is really taking off, it's probably a great time to take your email program and make it much more sophisticated. So look at I mean, first of all, you want to know who's on both lists and who's you can
Hmm.
see whether or not there's a correlation between being on the email list and on the text list. But yeah, I think that's funny because most people would love to even think that they could be doing text from a nonprofit if you're in like constant contact or something. But it's great that you're doing it. Whoever put that in.
Is there a point at which I need to stop emailing because people are tired of it?
Oh no, definitely not. Whatever, no matter how much you're emailing right now, the answer for how much should you email is probably double. And if you would fight me on that, I would say you need to segment more. If you are emailing so much that you don't think that people are going to respond or you're starting to get unsubscribes, it doesn't mean send fewer number of emails. It means like send more targeted emails. So definitely be sending twice as much. And if you're absolutely amazing and you're sending as much as the benchmark, great. Now you can send even more because you're going to start doing 8 different groups of people instead of 4, et cetera. I mean, if you really want to play the game, and
Mhm.
you'll see results because people know when you're like, you can feel it when it goes up to that next level, when all of a sudden this nonprofit's talking to you like Target talks to you. You're like, oh, they're really investing in me and in their brand, and they're going to be around for a while. And I trust them with my money because they're not, pretending it's 1985.
And then we all know what the unsubscribe button is. That's obvious. But there's also the sort of direct mail unsubscribe mark where somebody scribbles angry words on the reply form and sends it back and says, leave me alone. So I'm gonna ask both of you about it, but Stephanie, should we be worried about unsubscribes? Like I just unsubscribed from list today. Should that organization be mad? Should they be scared? Should they be worried that they lost Austin from their list?
Well, yes, they should be very worried that they lost Austin from their list. But I'm a huge fan of the unsubscribe button, and I don't think you should be afraid of it. If you're at the place where you have an unsubscribe percentage of like 1% or something wild, when it's much more normal to have 0.1, then you need to look at what you're doing and make sure that you're not emailing lists you don't have permission to email and stuff like that. Like, you can use it as a barometer, but it's much more effective to look at your unsubscribe rate against yourself over time. You're really just checking like the red flag number when you're looking at benchmarks. But if you think like you want to relate to people personally, you're telling them everything about your mission. That's really important. And if they're getting that email and saying that's not me and unsubscribing, great. They opted themselves out. They self-selected as not your most loyal donor, and you don't have to worry about them anymore.
I want to dig in further, but I'm also watching the clock. But like, this is the sort of thing where you and I would be sitting down and looking at the unsubscribe rate, and we're just going to think about it on a case-by-case basis. Like, this trickled up a little bit. Is this in dangerous territory? And we can only know in a specific situation, but just because you see these unsubscribes doesn't mean it's a bad thing, right? And often it's just, we're trying to build, to your point earlier at the beginning, we're trying to build a membership of people who care about this kind of thing. And if they want to get out of there, that's okay, right? Because we want people here who care about this and also have some money to give. Mark, what about in direct mail? Should we be afraid of the unsubscribe angry reply form letter?
No, because the quality of the list matters. Like I said earlier, it's like 40% of your results. So like when Stephanie was talking about segmentation earlier, that's how I was interpreting that in my head was, yes, quality of the list matters. And like a good example of that example I gave earlier about the client who had like 17,000 donors that were just kind of prospects, and then we were launching their direct response program. We as we mailed into it, and we found out the quality that was there and that what wasn't there. Well, just recently we did a mailing of like a more focused mailing of 17,000 after we had converted. Well, we acquired 10,000 donors in the past 6 months. So that was a select with all those recent donors, and then the best of the remainder, and we got 4-to-1 ROI on that. So, which is like what I would expect from a pretty healthy, direct mail, direct response file. In terms of direct mail, that's a great result. $4 back for every dollar you spent. And that was just a matter of quality of the list went up. And then the intentionality of our segmentation got more intentional, and we mailed the better names.
Yeah, okay, that's a great point, Mark, right? So when people are unsubscribing from mail or from email, what's actually happening is that your list is getting better because people who aren't interested are getting out. Now, that can't just happen forever. We need to be backfilling. We need to be bringing the right people in. We can't just be making people angry. But if we're putting
there's one thing I want to say. There's one thing I really want to say is that for every like complaint that you get, I mean, I look at every donation as a positive message. So one of the first questions I ask when people bring up complaints is, how many do you have? Could I see them? Could I go into your mailroom and look around a little bit? And almost invariably, it's just this little bit of minuscule, and this gets into human psychology. I don't want to get into it now, but it's like, oh, wow, I don't feel good about asking these people for money, and gets into all that. But a positive response, a gift is they just sent you a love letter, a little love note, and hopefully you're sending love notes back, by the way. So one other point that's really important. One of the advantages of being an older guy that's been around a lot and done every job in the back room, I've had the responsibility for executing this stuff in terms of the database and the CRM, and there's a thing called mail restriction codes, or whatever you happen to call them in your CRM database. It's not an all or nothing thing. Sometimes you have to train your staff on how to respond. It's a customer service issue. It's one person at a time. It's very personal. It's an opportunity too, by the way, because now you have a chance to talk to this person, write them back, call them back, email them back, try to make it right, make them happy, explain it, let them know that they're important, they matter. Maybe that's all that it's going to take. And don't just cut them off entirely from so a mail restriction code is an incremental kind of reducing reducing the frequency of contact. Now, and then, of course, you could cut it off entirely. But that's the kind of analog like version compared to the unsubscribe button that we use in databases for CRMs for direct mail. But the mechanics of it are important. It matters. It's part of your list hygiene. You want a good list, and you want a clean list. And it's hard work. You have to put in the footwork day in and day out.
Stephanie, can you reacquire unsubscribed email, people who unsubscribe from the email?
You definitely can in some ways. You can, I mean, there's always a possibility that these people are going to come back to you through the funnel that you hopefully have set up on your website and social presence to bring people in. So they might come back at a future time. There's one thing to know is that they haven't completely unsubscribed, even when they've unsubscribed. If they're a monthly donor to you, if they're a yearly donor, if you have a transaction on record with them, you can always legally reach out to them with a transactional email. It can't be a solicitation by itself. It has to say something about that person's donation. But there are ways to reach out every once in a while. And there is retargeting that you can do on social, but you should talk to your lawyer about it because I don't know which ones of them are legal.
Okay, perfect. All right, a couple questions lightning round here very quickly. Mark, when do I mail lapsed donors, and how many lapsed donors do I mail?
No, that's funny. It depends on the file and what you're dealing with. I've got a client. We're in growth mode, so our segmentation has been relatively simple and relatively deep, deliberately, because we're trying to maintain as many of those donors as possible. Now as the file's maturing, it's been a couple of years. People are moving into those lapse segments. We're watching that. It's pig in the python. A lot of donors came in, so you're going to have more acquisition means more attrition. So we want to minimize that, obviously, but now we're thinking, okay, what's the best way to push these people now? We're not going to just keep them in house file segmentation. So I guess long story short is you've got to customize it and cater it to the situation. But we're working them back into acquisition. We're doing lapsed donor calls, believe it or not. We've got we're in text messages, email. So there's lots of ways that we want to try to get back to them. But if they're direct mail acquired, it's most likely we'll get them back through direct mail.
Steph, when do I email lapsed donors?
Always. And especially at the end of every single month, when you do your e-renewal, which I'm sure you're all doing faithfully at the end of every single month, it says, Mark, thank you so much for being a value donor to AmPhil. I wanted to let you know that your membership is about to expire, your donation is no longer current, et cetera, et cetera. Something somewhere is probably in red. It looks a little bit bold, and people respond really well to it. So yeah, just be emailing them all the time, and always make them a segment in your regular solicitations, even if it's going to be the same verbiage that you're using for prospects, because the lapsed audiences can get a little bit, like, they can react to different things. I found for some lapsed audiences that they actually respond to much longer letters than I would think. So section them off, watch them, see what they respond to, and email them all the time.
And then last question, we're back in this package we put together at the beginning of this call, and I'm asking Stephanie whether we can email major donors. What do we do? Do we segment them out? Do we email them?
You definitely segment them, but not out. These are the people who are saying more than anybody else that they care about what you do. They're putting their dollars behind it. And it's really, really common for people to want to stop emailing them. Like, they get this reward of not getting an email from you when they give a certain amount of money, but they tend to actually want more information from you, not less, every time that I've ever tested that. And plus, I mean, sometimes you get surprised. We did a campaign in December for a $50,000 matching challenge. A major donor wrote in and said, I'd like to match that $50,000. There you go. You could have sectioned that guy out.
Yeah, or keep him in. I love it.
But speak differently to them.
Perfect. Okay, that's what we've got. As you can see in the chat, Mark and Stephanie both said they'd love to be in touch with questions or a free consultation about your email strategy, your direct mail strategy. Take advantage of it. It'll be an exciting conversation in either case. Let me tell you about two other things coming up on February 16th, an In the Trenches masterclass on major gifts. That's a very detailed 3-hour class. closed room to really get into the weeds and talk about how to improve your major gifts program. On February 28th, we have a Givers, Doers, and Thinkers webinar hosted by Jack Fowler on Hollywood's relationship to civil society. Very excitingly, we have Ross Douthat and Kyle Smith joining us for that. So you won't want to miss that one. That'll be super exciting. Links are in the chat box. Take a look there. Feel free to be in touch. We hope to see you soon. Thanks for being here. And thank you, as always, for everything that you do for civil society. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Mark. And thank you, Stephanie.
Thanks for having us.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.